Greetings, respected viewers. Well, I'm making this video at the request of one of my dear subscribers because someone donated to me most liberally, and I'm very keen to repay such generosity. And this is a video about Sir Osbert Sitwell, but I did do one about a year ago outside this very house. For those of you who missed it, can't find it on my channel. She requested the Sitwells in general, but I'm just going to concentrate on Sir Osbert. So anyway, he was born in 1892 in London, not in this house at St James's, a couple of miles away, just by St James's Palace. Here we are in Chelsea. This is the only house in London with a blue plaque on it dedicated to him. And he came from an upper class family. His mother was born Lady Ida Denison, and his father was a baronet, as in had the title Sir. Not just any man you address as Sir if you don't know his name, being courteous. A distinguished landed family with stately homes in Yorkshire and in Derbyshire. So been prominent in the English Midlands and in Northern England for centuries. So he grew up in opulence. He went to Ludgrove, then as now regarded as perhaps the most distinguished prep school in the United Kingdom. This is for little boys aged 7 to 13. It's where Prince Harry went, but don't let that put you off. Anyway, so then he went on to Eton, and when he left Eton he didn't go on to tertiary education. Very few people went to university in those days. Even half of Etonians didn't go on to university back then. So he was commissioned into a cavalry regiment, but it disagreed with him. So then he transferred to the Grenadier Guards. You know those soldiers you see stomping around outside Buckingham Palace with a black bearskin hat yay high, and those red, well, scarlet tunics, those. Okay, so the Grenadier Guards, they've been founded in the 17th century. The name is related to grenade, as in they used to be the tallest guys. The idea is they have the longest throw, as they're the tallest ones. And they used to be selected on the basis of height, and there was the Queen's Company, when there was a king, the King's Company, who all had to be over 6'4" or something, but the officers didn't. Now these days I think it's all gone by the wayside because the British Army's tiny, so they have the height requirement. But he's in the Grenadier Guards, and part of the brigade of guards, there are these 5 guards regiments, and the purpose of the guards is to guard the royal family in London, so they're always here. So there are these public duties. They used to march to the Bank of England every night until 1970, as well as being in front outside St James's Palace. That's actually the official residence of the royal family, not Buckingham Palace, contrary to popular misconception. But anyway, he was very much a litterateur, and odd for a military man, rather an aesthete, perhaps a trifle effete. His younger brother was Sir Cheverel, and his sister was Edith. They're all well-known literary figures in the interwar years. So the First World War came, and La Belle Époque was over, because he'd spent much of his free time going to the theatre or frequenting art galleries. So he's a man of refined sensibilities, and then he had to find himself crawling through the mud of Flanders, trying not to get killed. Somehow survived the war without even being wounded, so far as I know. So came back to London and really threw himself into a literary career. So he published a number of novels, some of them well received. Those Were the Days was the title of one of them. I don't know if he invented the phrase actually, and some volumes of poesy. He travelled very frequently. In 1909, his father had bought a ruined castle, Montefiughi, I think it's pronounced, in Italy, close to Venice. Close to Florence, forgive me. So after the war, Osbert Sitwell travelled throughout Europe and indeed further afield, to Africa, the American continent, to Asia, and so forth. And so he produced an awful lot of travel writing. He's a noted memoirist. So he moved in high society, a bit too old to be considered one of the bright young things, but he was very close to the future King George VI, and he abominated the highly irresponsible and self-indulgent Edward VIII, and as he thought, his ghastly wife, Wallis Simpson. But Osbert Sitwell also hit out at those who'd been groupies of that couple, but abandoned them once scandal broke. So Sitwell was at least fairly consistent in his views. He was mentioned in Who's Who. Before the internet, Who's Who was much more important, because a prominent person trying to find out, well, what's the background, when was he born, and what was his schooling, and who's he related to, and what jobs has he had. You couldn't look it up easily. There was a book called Who's Who, published in the mid-19th century. I mean, I think it's still going. There's much less need for it these days. But in it, they would ask education. You fill it out yourself. They send it to you. You don't have to fill it out if you don't want to. Send it to every member of Parliament, anyone they think is eminent. But and he very wittily quipped his education was in the holidays from Eton, because he didn't think he had much of an education knocked into him there. So I'm not sure what he was doing in the Second World War, but he was very well known by that time. He lived here from 19 19, if I got that right. Yeah. And then he spent a lot of his time in Italy towards the end of his life. He was afflicted with Parkinson's by the 1950s, and he could scarcely write, though he did publish a last work in the 1960s. He died in 1969 in Florence, and it is buried in Florence. I must go to his grave sometime. So that's just a little bit about Osbert Sitwell. His brother Sir Cheverel, the only other Sir Cheverel I've ever heard of, that Dr. Sir Cheverel, who's involved in the Popish plot. So I wonder if his name's in his honour. Okay, so that's enough about Osbert Sitwell, who, as he said, he strove to hold the line against Philistinism, but it was largely the losing battle. Okay, toodle pip.